Welcome back to Proxy, everybody. And today we're going to be looking at a little bit of an interesting topic, something that piqued my interest when I first saw the Arks of Omen detachment. And that is, are Wraithknight armies finally going to be viable in the Arks of Omen? So a lot of players have been considering running Wraithknight armies now because of the fact that you can now take 3 Lords of War as a compulsory choice and up to 3 additional Lords of War in an Arks of Omen detachment, which is really cool, which means that for the first time, Wraithknights can actually benefit from craft rolled traits. And you don't have to pay any extra CP to include them in your army, which is really cool. And honestly, even though it's not going to be very competitive, I don't really give a damn, to be honest. It is awesome. For the first time, we can finally run a viable, semi-competitive or casual Wraithknight army and have a blast with it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it and talk a little bit about how to run a craft rolled Eldar Wraithknight army in Arks of Omen. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the stats, weapons, and special rules of Wraithknights, of course, do a quick review of that. We're going to be looking at the barriers that are going to be lifted with the coming Arks of Omen expansion. We're going to be looking at the best craft rolls to run a Wraithknight list in. And lastly, I'm going to give you guys an example of a Wraithknight list using the Uthway craft roll, which I plan to run in Arks of Omen. Now, this list was made before the points changes, so there are going to be a few differences here and there. But honestly, it shouldn't be too much different from what we can actually end up running. So let's go ahead and take a look. So, quick review of the Wraithknight. Now, the Wraithknight does have a massive cost. It starts at 400 points. It has pretty decent defensive stats, right? Toughness 8, 22 wounds, 3+ save is okay. 5 attacks is not the greatest for the cost, and it has fairly average weapon skill and ballistic skill. So you look at this thing at first, and it's like, oh, this thing sucks, right? And honestly, a lot of people, thought that in the last edition. However, I think that with the fact that you can now have this thing with craft roll traits, I think it's going to be much more effective and much better in a number of ways. So taking a look at its weapons, of course, we have the Sun Cannon, which is great at killing 3 wound, toughness 4 models, but costs a bit more. With the reduction of Armor of Contempt, I think this is going to be a weapon that's much better against Terminators for its cost. We have the Titanic Ghostglaive, and now the Titanic Ghostglaive is one of those weapons that's just a world killer, right? Kills about everything, and it's an absolute monster, and it's able to crack even the toughest targets and sweep enemy infantry units aside with ease. And even though you can run a Wraithknight pure range, I think that the Titanic Ghostglaive is an auto-include. I have to admit. I think especially in a Wraithknight army, you need to take this thing because your Wraithknights are going to get into combat, and to be honest with you, the other close combat weapon that we'll talk about in a little bit just really isn't good. So you definitely want to make sure that your Wraithknight has the Titanic Ghostglaive equipped. And of course, that terrible weapon I'm talking about is the Eldari Titanic Feet. God, the stuff of absolute nightmares. Awful on paper and awful just imagining those Titanic feet. Disgusting. So definitely don't want to take those. You definitely want to take the Ghostglaive instead. Much sexier. Also, the Wraithknight can take the Heavy Wraith Cannon, which is an extremely powerful anti-large weapon with great range, great damage, amazing AP at AP -4, and of course it does D3 mortal wounds on a 6 to wound, so it has good Strands of Fate synergy as well. And honestly, you're going to be using a lot of Strands of Fate with a Wraithknight style army, and this is a great way to capitalize on that. As for the small arms weapons that the Wraithknight can take, you can take scatter lasers, shuriken cannons, and star cannons. So small arms weapons just basically give you additional firepower. Gives the Wraithknight something that it can shoot while in combat. I typically prefer the scatter laser just for the cost and the fact that you don't really want to waste your more valuable weapons clearing chaff that are blocking off your charge. So if you are running a Wraithknight style list, you're probably going to be lacking a lot of anti-infantry or anti-chaff weaponry. So I like to put in the cheap scatter lasers. But, you could put in any weapon if you want. It's just a little bit more expensive for the other options. Typically, I prefer to keep the Wraithknights cheap as possible so that I can branch out more support for the rest of my army. So then we have the war gear options. Now, you can equip your Wraithknight in several ways. Now, I do think there is a quote-unquote correct way to equip a Wraith Knight, but you can equip them any way you like. So the first one, of course, you can give it a Sun Cannon and a Scatter Shield. Now, the Scatter Shield, of course, gives it a 4+ invul save. You can give it a Sun Cannon and a Heavy Wraith Cannon. You can give it 2 Heavy Wraith Cannons. You can give it a Wraith Cannon and a Scatter Shield. You can give it the Titanic Ghostglaive and a Scatter Shield. Or you can give it that Titanic Ghostglaive and the Heavy Wraith Cannon. I actually think that last option right there and the Titanic Ghostglaive and the Scatter Shield, both of those last options are probably the best way to equip them because they typically are the cheapest and they're also the most cost effective in terms of the damage that they can deal to enemy units. And if you do choose to go with the Heavy Wraith Cannon instead of the Scatter Shield, thankfully, the Wraith Knight comes with a 5+ invul standard, which is great because you can capitalize on using Strands of Fate once again. And it has a massive and potentially game-changing explosion as well. So you really don't want to get this thing near something like a Farseer because they will suffer D6 mortal wounds. This could easily kill your Farseer if you get unlucky. So definitely watch out for that. Again, this could be great for killing enemy units, by the way, but it can also be devastating for your own units. So you do have to be careful about that. It also has the Unstoppable Revenant ability, which means that it can charge in the turn it fell back. So if your opponent decides to try to tie you up with something, you can just dip on out of there. You can say no thanks, fall back, and charge something else. And for 1 command point, you can also use the Feigned Retreat stratagem, which will allow you to shoot in addition. And like all Wraith units, it has Wraithbone Form, which negates 1 damage from each attack allocated against it, which makes it a little bit tougher. So, what were the barriers that are going to be lifted with the coming Arks of Omen expansion? So, you can now take up to 6 Lords of War in a single army at no additional command cost. Plus, other units, right? You can also have other units in that list as well. So, you are no longer forced to be in an auxiliary detachment, so you can also benefit from craft roll traits as well. There are several craft roll traits that the Wraith Knight would be awesome with, and strategic reserves are free. So that's going to be really important. That basically means you can put most of your Wraith Knights in reserve and they can come in later in the game so they don't get blown up during the first turn by your whole opponent's army. And again, there's a lot of armies out there that can blow up a Wraith Knight in a single turn. So being able to have the option of putting them in strategic reserve for free is absolutely amazing, considering they are they were previously a lot of command points to hold in reserve. So these are actually the best craft rolls I think a Wraith Knight list would work in. Uthway, Iyanden, Altnazar, and the custom craft rolls. Uthway has way better casting for supporting Warlocks and Farseers, which are going to be very important to the success of a Wraith Knight list. You have 5+ ignores mortal wounds army-wide, which is very good at negating things that are going to cause a lot of mortal wounds to Wraith Knights. Again, Wraith Knights don't have a lot of defense against that kind of thing, so having a 5+ against that is a very good thing. And extra Strands of Fate dice with the Warlord trait is extra useful on high-impact models like Wraith Knights, who not only can benefit from the Heavy Wraith Cannon, being able to do extra mortal wounds on 6 to wound, but also can save with their invul save. So, if your opponent is firing a lot of high-powered shots at it, it can easily negate several of those with a good Strands of Fate roll. Iyanden is also a decent choice, and basically they have a mini Armor of Contempt against AP-1 and AP-2 weapons, which is very useful when your opponent only has one type of target to shoot. So if your opponent's army can only target the Wraith Knights, guess what? The mini Armor of Contempt is actually going to be useful against this type of situation. Also, the Guided Wraith Sight stratagem gives Spirit Seers a use in this kind of list because they can buff Wraith Knights from across the board. Wraith Knights are mostly going to be essentially wounding everything on 2+, so having a reroll of basically to wound on everything is very useful, especially since they can't benefit from Doom. The Altnazar is also another craft roll that is very good with Wraith Knights. So they can give a Wraith Knight a 4+ ignores mortal wounds, which is fantastic, even better than the Uthway trait for a command point. They have +1 AP to all first round melee attacks, which is excellent because it allows the Wraithknights to basically negate pretty much all armor they come across in close combat. And the relic that they have gives very reliable Strands of Fate rolls. So you can more reliably get that, Strands of Fate to wound and that Strands of Fate to your saves. And also the custom craft rolls have several traits that could be useful with Wraith Knight armies, including Warding Runes for that 5+ ignores mortals, Headstrong for charge rerolls, which honestly Wraith Knights can't benefit from normally, and they can't benefit from things like Ghost Walk, so this is very useful for getting them in combat. Wrath of the Dead for Wraith Knight heroic interventions, which is awesome because they have such a large base size. Heroically intervening with a Wraith Knight is a very good way to deny enemies board space. And essentially that way your opponent can't really avoid them by charging other units near the Wraith Knights. And lastly, Vengeful for the extra attacks on 6s to hit in melee is very good, especially with the Titanic Ghostclave. And of course, there's some honorable mentions in there. I think, obviously Masters of Concealment is very decent for giving a little bit of extra armor to the Wraith Knights against range attacks. And there's a couple of other ones here and there that are effective as well. So without further ado, let us open up with an example of a Wraith Knight list using the Uthway craft roll. And again, in this list, there's going to be a few differences. I know that the points just recently changed, but, essentially it's going to be very similar. So let's go ahead and take a look. So for our HQ, we have a Farseer Skyrunner with Fortune, Fateful Divergence, and Will of Azurian. It has the Fate Reader and Ghost Helm of Al-Shazir, Relic, and Warlord trait. That's going to come in at 125. It's going to be 135 when the Arks of Omen comes out. The Avatar of Cain is in this list as well. He's 280, so we have the Avatar on top of it all. This was actually a subscriber idea that said it would probably be a good idea to put an Avatar of Cain in a Wraith Knight list, and honestly, I couldn't agree more. I think the Avatar is a very hard target to crack, and when you have a lot of Wraith Knights around too, it's going to be very hard for your opponent to deal with it. For our Lords of War, we have 3 Wraith Knights. We have basically 3 Wraith Knights with the same loadouts. Wraith Knight with Titanic Ghostclave, Heavy Wraith Cannon, and 2 Scatter Lasers. Of course, you can mix and match these weapons however you want, but typically I think this is the most balanced build. It's good against everything. The Titanic Ghostclave can take out heavy and light stuff. The Heavy Wraith Cannon is a great thing to pop enemy vehicles and things that could threaten the Wraith Knights. And of course, the Scatter Lasers are good at taking out chaff. For our elites, we have 3 Warlock Skyrunners, which are going to be the same points because the Skyrunners didn't increase in points in the new Arks of Omen expansion. We have a Warlock Skyrunner with Horrify and Bolden, Quicken and Restrain, and Jinx and Protect. And again, these are either going to be boosting the Avatar, quickening the Avatar into a good position, or just honestly simply debuffing the enemy. And I think Horrify is a great psychic power in this because it basically denies your opponent the ability to charge his melee units into you, which is absolutely hilarious. So if your opponent wants to charge a really heavy-duty Terminator unit into one of your Wraith Knights, just cast Horrify on them, and basically that enemy unit's going to strike last, your Wraith Knight's going to get the first attack, and let me tell you, that unit of Terminators or whatever unit is charging in is not really going to be able to survive too well against that. And lastly, for fast attack, we have 2 Vipers with Scatter Lasers, just for some extra objective control and honestly just denial, basically. Vipers are very good at just charging into enemy units and denying your opponent the ability to get certain positional advantages on your army, which is extremely important when you have only a few models on the table. So in total in that list, we have a Farseer with a lot of cool psychic powers to help the Avatar survive. We have the Avatar of Cain. We have 3 Wraith Knights with very good, strong loadouts. And we have 2 Vipers and 3 Warlocks for support. So that's a pretty good list there, pretty balanced list. And I think a list that can do honestly very well, even semi-competitively, amongst a group of friends that plays, to win and stuff like that. I think it could be very effective. And not to mention, just fun as hell, honestly. So in conclusion, is a Wraith Knight theme list going to be an ultra competitive list? Probably still no. Definitely not. Of course not, right? But it's certainly looking to have a lot more viability at the casual and semi-competitive levels. I think, honestly, at the competitive, ultra-competitive levels, there's just way too much stuff that can just blow the Wraith Knight up too easily, right? There's too many crazy psychic power lists and auto-wounding lists out there, especially with the new Imperial Guard that just have Born Soldiers and just will auto-wound all your Wraith Knights super easily. And, stuff like that. They're really just honestly, a little bit of a tangent here, but I am not a fan of auto wounding abilities. I hate to say it. I think that, yes, wound on a fixed number, you know, like poison weapons, all that stuff is really good and I think really balanced in a lot of ways. But being able to just roll a 6 to hit and auto wound something with a last gun doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And honestly, same goes for Hail of Doom. I know I've said this before, but I don't think Hail of Doom is a good rule. I don't think it's structurally sound as a, you know, kind of rule set. And I don't think any kind of auto wound abilities like Hail of Doom, like Born Soldiers, is actually healthy for the game in general. So, is it going to be super competitive? Probably not. Again, probably no. But it's, again, really fun. And with all the new toys and different interactions available to Wraithknights in the Arks of Omen expansion, I, for one, cannot wait to dust off the old Wraithknight sitting on my shelf and play him in a couple of games. And of course, I'll probably have to proxy the other Wraithknights. And again, they do call me Proxy Hammer because I do proxy things quite often to try them out and stuff like that. So I will be trying out this list if I have a blast with it, if it's awesome, which I think it will be. I will probably be sinking hundreds of dollars into more Wraithknights. Even though in 6 months, it'll probably change again and I'll probably regret it. So, hey, don't take my word for it. Don't just go out there and buy 4 Wraithknights or 3 Wraithknights or whatever. Probably just proxy them first just to test them out and see if you actually like to do it. There's a really easy way to proxy these guys, actually. You just have to have at least one Wraithknight, and then you go to the store and buy these things called skewers. They're wooden skewers. They're used for kebabs and things like that. You basically just measure the skewer up to the Wraithknight, cut off what you need to so that the height is semi-similar. You cut out a piece of cardboard that is the same base size as the Wraithknight. So just measure it, you know, on cardboard with marker and then cut it out. And then just stick the skewer in the middle of the base and glue it. And then, believe it or not, it actually makes a pretty good proxy because Wraithknights can't benefit from obscuring terrain anyway. So having, you know, arms and guns and stuff like that doesn't prevent it from getting seen behind obscuring terrain. So makes a pretty good proxy. And honestly, it's very easy to move around and stuff like that. And yeah, you can go ahead and try it out if you want. And to be honest with you guys, that is probably what I'm going to be doing with a list like this. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Leave a comment in the comment section if you guys have any ideas about this. I think it looks fun. I think it looks like a blast, and it's probably one of the most fun things I'm looking forward to in Arks of Omen. And I'm actually going to be doing a battle report on this eventually, as soon as I kind of have the time. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out. I'll see you guys next time, and have a good one. See you guys later.